The year 1666, the day the world changed. For Great Britain, it was the great year of wonders. 23-year-old Isaac Newton returned to his home was Thorpe Manor. The law of universal gravitation, the methods of calculus, the decomposition of light, and the Prism experiments were broken through one by one. Newton's achievements that year were comparable to a miracle. This greatly prepared the glorious revolution that broke out in 1988, as well as the Industrial Revolution that would later change the world's structure. In the same year, the French Academy of Sciences was officially founded. It was the embodiment of Louis XIII's centralized power and nation glory. Although it made certain contributions to science, it was instrumented by loyal power. Eventually, social conflicts executed, and the French Revolution broke out. At the same time, 8,100 kilometers away inside the Forbidden City, a court struggle was escalating. The 12-year-old Emperor Kangxi, pressured by elderly politicians, ordered the execution of a missionary whom Kangxi's own father called Mafa, and who had personally advanced and helped Kangxi ascend the throne. Adam Shao Wang Beer. 3 years later, the 15-year-old emperor finally eliminated the power minister. The first thing he did after taking power was to restore missionary Shao's reputation and take his assistant, the Jesuit Ferdinand Rebest, as his teacher. From then on, this 15-year-old young man, with intense curiosity about the world, firmly stepped into the gate of Western science. The status of Western science was established during the Kangxi reign. The agency managing the missionaries was moved from the Board of Rites to the Imperial Household Department. This meant, during the Kangxi reign, one of the most powerful periods in Chinese history, the missionaries would be seen as the emperor's private advisors. After this, a steady stream of missionaries entered China. The Sun King, Louis XIII, assigned Jesuit priests to China. They brought knowledge like the Newtonian system and calculus into this ancient empire. At this moment, three great nations were subtly connected by this continuous straight line of science. An actual empire, a powerful empire, a relatively stable external environment, and decent economic conditions. All the conditions for the breadth of scientific, ideological, and institutional innovation were set before their eyes. History, however, has already told us about 214 years later, this eastern giant, under the warships and heavy artillery of Western, closed its eyes in humiliation and exhaustion. What actually happened? What turned this ancient empire, which should have embraced science, into the backward nation closed off from the world? Next, let's return to the period history end in the following three parts: self-serving study, force teacher-student ties, and power hard to let go. Tell a story spanning 300 years. The missionaries represented by Ferdinand Rebest. What they taught in the court were mainly the emerging subjects known as Western learning. It was mainly composed of mathematics, the theoretical algebra, and geometry. Kangxi was more interested in algebra. Algebra brought about a revolution. It introduced uncertainty into previously certain world of math. Kangxi's keen intuition grasped this shift. He longed for new ways to solve problems. An edict personal written by Kangxi during one of his tours recorded, "Since I set out, I have studied new algebraic methods with my sons every day. It was very hard to understand." A copy of this edict is still kept in Rome. This tells us that the emperor, while traveling, was studying algebra with his sons the whole time. The very hard to understand here doesn't mean Kangxi could not read the algebraic equations. In fact, algebra was also new to the missionaries at the time. Although Kangxi did not fully understand, he kept urging the missionaries to rewrite the algebra clearly, and constantly asked if there was a neural method of cube roots. this problem would not be truly solved until the mid-18th century. Also, the learning materials and theoretical foundation were weak. Kangxi still wanted to figure out algebra. He translated technical terms like yuan, ci, gen. At the same time, he ordered the compilation of the Yu Li Jing Yun. This book was mainly edited by the third prince, and it took 10 years to successfully compile. The book detailed Western mathematical achievements such as arithmetic, algebra, plane geometry, and plane trigonometry. This demonstrates Kangxi's deep love for Western mathematics. The study of algebra was effective. It effectually transformed the perspective of Kangxi, a feudal emperor, to a more scientific one to a certain degree. Historical records state that Kangxi once discovered in the paddy field of the Imperial garden a rice plant that ripened 10 days earlier than the others. Kangxi immediately realized that the earlier ripening rice was more likely to avoid the autumn cold waves in the north and secure the harvest. Kangxi did not rush to promote it. Instead, he immediately started a rice experiment. He observed the rice's adaptability under different natural conditions. Through comparison, detailed daily records, and finally select a more stable and high-yield rice. After this, he required officials in several provinces to plant this spiritual variety to increase grain output and deal with famine crises. Seeing this, do you feel that Kangxi was simply a perfect emperor, vibrant thirst of knowledge, scientific methodology, and a benevolent heart? He was truly flawless. But was this truly the case? When we read history, we must not forget that every single sit-down by the emperor of a feudal dynasty was inseparable from complex political calculation. As a young emperor who could eliminate rivals at the age of 15, the sense of power control was Kangxi's lifelong pursuit. During the case of a rehabilitating missionary shell, Kangxi increasingly found that he was constantly served by court officials. He needed a knowledgeable person to break his knowledge barrier from the third party. In short, the main purpose of Emperor Kangxi studying Western learning was merely give himself and his sons a God's eyes view. He had to know more than his officials, so he would not be served by them. As for increasing grain output, it was because the princes gained countless lands outside by plunder. Increasing grain output could keep the land value stable or even raise it. Famine would come anyway. Nobody could stop it. Science, in Kangxi's eyes, was a tool of rule. In this world, there was no emperor who would start a revolution against himself. As his urge increased, the old emperor's anxiety about power became more prominent. For the last time, this aging dragon turned his still sharp fins toward the teachers who taught him science. In 1684, the 13-year-old Kangxi Emperor finally quelled the rebellion in Taiwan. By then, the Han people's territory was fully held by its former emperor. However, Kangxi realized the military conquest could not fill the gap between ethnic groups. Governing the country still required Han scholars. So Kangxi traveled to Qufu, Shandong, and made a move that shocked the court and the public. Inside the temple of Confucius, he performed the 3 kneelings and 9 kowtows. This action moved the Han officials present to tears, believing this Fujian emperor truly understood the essence of Chinese civilization. From this moment, the Qing dynasty's legitimacy was finally established. It finally became a legitimate Center Plains dynasty, not merely Fujian conquerors. But was this truly the case? Let's state the conclusion first. Whether it was studying Western science or respecting Han culture, both were just an outfit called civilization that a barbaric ruler put on himself. In China, ancestor worship and Confucius worship are important efforts in people's lives. From a Chinese perspective, this belonged to secular rites and cultural traditions, not idol worship. The Roman Curia, however, did not say it this way. Two edicts in 1704 and 1706 declared that the ancestor and the Confucius worship would be considered idol worship. This meant that the ancestor believers in China had to give up ancestor worship or they would be excommunicated. Kangxi was a 50-year-old middle-aged man at this time. Because of the edicts, his attitude towards the missionaries turned from respect to angry. He believed the Pope interfered with China's internal affairs and cultural traditions. This was a great offense to his ruling authority. He angrily declared, "There is no need for Westerners to preach in China after this. They could be prohibited to avoid trouble." After this, Kangxi issued this historically famous The Red Manifesto. Large numbers of missionaries were expelled from the country. Only those who abandoned the position of Roman Curia were qualified to remain in the court. But if you think this was the ultimate defense of Confucius, then you have fallen into Kangxi's trap. Toward those literati and scholars, and even the teacher of his own son, Kangxi only put on the two outfits named science and Confucianism when power required it. But when either of them went against his power, no matter how magnificent these two outfits were, they become burdens that Kangxi could immediately throw away. There is an old Chinese saying, "A teacher for a day is a father for life." Kangxi had become a barbaric patricide, and his extreme utilitarianism also planted the seeds of dynasty's chaos and future decline. Next, let's see how the spark of science was extinguished in Eastern in just 20 years. In 1698, the British engineer Thomas Savery invented the first practical steam engine and began using it for pumping water out of mines. 18 years later, the water steam engine was born, and mankind firmly entered the age of steam. However, 20 years earlier, in 1672, Ferdinand Weber, who was serving the Qing court at the time, used the principle of steam jet rotation to make a steam-powered four-wheeled carriage for Emperor Kangxi. But in China at this time, common people still relied on agriculture as the base. There was no industrial population, nor did the emperor have the will to establish industry. That steam-powered carriage could not be converted into a tool of protection. It could only become a private royal collection, along with many delicate scientific equipment tools sealed within the deep forbidden city. In the later Kangxi reign, compared to vague and distant industrial dreams, choosing a prince who could stabilize the empire was Kangxi's highest priority work. Monarchs in feudal dynasties all hoped their heir would be their own reincarnation. Kangxi was no exception. But Kangxi's self-possession was not about science and democracy, but about tolerance and benevolence. Kangxi also hoped the prince could maintain his ruling principles while stabilizing the surrounding situation. Under these conditions, the first prince, Yingzhen, who would later become the Yongzheng Emperor, was chosen as the new emperor at the time the old emperor died. Yongzhen's character was upright. He dared to offend any enemy in court. At the same time, he used a series of political performances to win his father's recognition, benevolent image. Most importantly, Yongzheng became a disciple of the great Vajrayana master, the third Chenka, who took to. He became a respected Buddhist practitioner in later generations. Buddha's study was also part of Yongzhen's political calculation. The seemingly harmless Buddhism allowed his father to feel the throne was safe, and showed he had no desire to harm his brothers. Meanwhile, through Vajrayana study, Yongzheng won over Tibetan and Mongolian nobles, strengthening the dynasty's border rule. As for science and industry, it seemed so insignificant compared to a lower of throne. A steam engine might move a huge rod from a point to another, but it could not push the emperor to surrender even a trace of the power in his hands. Within 3 years of Yongzhen's accession, a major purge of missionaries began. Except for the artists, all missionaries intending to preach were expelled from the country. churches were confiscated. All parent missionary activities would receive severe punishment. The era of public Catholic preaching in China ended with the disappearance of missionaries. The more crucial scientific thinking and global vision also narrowed as the rulers' horizons changed. The power of the feudal dynasty finally reached its peak at this time, but the rulers, immersed in power, did not realize that after crossing the peak lay a bottomless cliff. 200 years later, in a year when even the steam engine was long outdated, the Qing government, immensely wealthy by exploiting farmers, was like a ship covered in gold wedge. Under constant exploitation, fell into a bloody pool of backwardness. Facing China's century of humiliation, the rulers represented by Kangxi still lie in their magnificent tombs against the backdrop of gold and jewels, escaping the historical responsibility they should have borne. Looking back at Kangxi's entire life, he held an almost perfect script, yet played the weakest hand of the empire. In the stance of the most powerful empire, he possessed an almost God's eye view, but turned a blind eye to the world's structure. He sat on the most cutting-edge academic resources, the strongest teaching power in East Asia, but only treated learning as a political tool. He understood the immense power of science, but in this great choice concerning greatness, he ultimately chose his most barbaric and primitive desire. After a Chinese emperor died, his descendants would give him a temple name. This single Chinese character represented the emperor's life. Kangxi's temple name is Shenzhu, Holy Ancestor, but that was clearly for the royal family shattered by his prosperous age, but for the 400 million Chinese people under his rule. Kangxi, the emperor who personally closed the door of scientific enlightenment. He could not be called a holy ancestor at all. He is a historical sinner.